So what we're talking about today is the birth of modern thought, the way people conceptualize the world changes over time. People's political outlook, people's religious outlook, it is no different than any other aspect of life. You can see this in art, you can see this in literature, obviously you can see this in political organizations. The way people act is shaped by the way people think. So one of the big changes that happens between the traditional outlook and the modern outlook is the source of truth. What do we rely upon to know that something is true? In traditional societies, the source of knowledge is divine revelation, that spirits, gods, goddesses reveal to humans something important about how the world works. And that knowledge is handed to a priest, a priestess, a prophet, a seer, a shaman, who has special access to this and then shares it with the rest of the world. Eventually that gets written down in some type of scripture. Written conversations between human beings and supernatural beings. That scripture then becomes the guidepost for truth. The way people look at the world, the way people act in the world are guided, right? All of those behaviors are guided by this scripture. On the other hand, the modern world emphasizes human senses and human reason, that it's up to individuals to look at the world, to touch, feel, see, taste, smell, hear, and then recognize patterns in that sensation, use reason to explain those patterns, and those patterns then become a guidepost for human behavior. Right? If you can fit within the patterns of nature, you're going to be okay. If you try to contradict those patterns of nature, you're going to have problems. So one of the big things going on in the world today is COVID-19, right? Scientists go out and they measure the impact of this virus on people's lives. They look at how it spreads. They look at how to slow the spread, and they try to figure out general patterns. They developed a vaccine, and you get two competing claims about this vaccine. So on one hand, you've got people who say, oh, it doesn't work, it doesn't make a difference, oh, it's going to hurt you, right? And on the other hand, you've got the scientists who develop it said, no, it reduces your chance of infection, it reduces your chance of being hospitalized, it reduces your chance of death. There are very few side effects. Right? So how do we know which one of these is a correct assertion? On one hand, the vaccine is bad and ineffective. On the other hand, it's effective and relatively harmless, right? Those are two competing claims. Well, the scientific answer is to look at the data. And around the world, millions of people have had this. And the people that have had it, have the vaccine, are less likely to catch the disease. They're less likely to have a severe case of the disease, and they're less likely to be hospitalized. They're less likely to die. And lo and behold, there are very few side effects. This is the consensus, the scientific consensus around the world, where millions and millions of people in a variety of circumstances have had it, right? This is how the modern world problem solves. You're faced with a problem, you make an assertion that is measurable, You make an assertion that can be backed up by evidentiary knowledge, and then you apply reasoning to that to see if it makes sense or not. Right? Individuals do it, groups of people in it do it. This is our, quote, source of truth. Once scientists started providing that amount of guidance and reliability, there was a backlash among the religious communities around the world that's called literalism. A few, compared to the rest of the world, right? A few people asserted that their scripture needed to be taken literally. Doesn't matter whether it's Christian scripture, Hindu scripture, Islamic scripture. There are people who assert that their understanding of truth must be accepted as literal and that everybody else is wrong. In Western society, what this means in European society is that the Bible should be a source of cosmology and biology. That when someone starts down an educational path, they have to start with the Bible. They can look at the world, but they have to come back to the Bible because the Bible, whatever someone sees, will also always conform to the Bible, right? This is biblical literalism. This is fundamentalism. And in the world of cosmology, in the world of biology, these literalists argue that the world is fixed, that a transcendent being, a being not part of nature, a being above nature, designed and fixed the world as it was in the beginning, as it is now, and as it will ever be until the world ends, right? A divine being fixed a design that remains static throughout the history of the world. And in this cosmological, biological realm, God is a necessary being. That taking God out of the equation means the equation doesn't work anymore. And so there was a conflict in Europe at the beginning of the 20th century between the literalist and the scientist. Because the scientists were putting together a world view that relied on relativity. That there was no fixed design, there was no fixed truth, that the scientific process provides a source of cosmology and biology. By that, I mean that human beings use their senses, use their reason to understand the patterns in the world. And those patterns then are part of cosmology. How is the world ordered? Part of biology. How is life ordered? And at the heart of the scientific explanation of the world is evolution. The universe, the earth, and all of the life on earth is constantly evolving. There are rapid changes, there are small changes, there are fast changes, there are big changes. But the world and life in the world is constantly evolving or changing. In this explanation, then, God is an unnecessary being. If you go into a science class, you go into a chemistry class, you go into a biology class, you go into a history class, God is not part of why things happen. God is unnecessary to explain geology. God is unnecessary to explain biology. God is unnecessary to explain history or sociology. Because the scientific process only takes into account things that can be sensed and measured. One cannot sense or measure the impact of God or gods or goddesses in the world. There are lots of people who make claims about it, but there's no reliable way to evaluate a religious claim based from a Christian point of view or a Hindu point of view or a Muslim point of view. They're all making different claims about the world. But there is no way to measure, assert, evaluate any of those claims. And so the modern scientist, the modern scholar, steps away from scriptural explanations of the world and relies on a human explanation of the world. And by and large, there's one pattern that emerges from all of this, is that it doesn't matter whether it's biology, doesn't matter whether it's cosmology, doesn't matter whether it's sociology or anthropology or history, is that everything in the world, everything we can see, touch, feel, measure, is constantly changing. It's all relative. Things may appear fixed for a certain amount of time, but over time, everything changes. So what we're going to do then is look at biblical literalism. How did it emerge in Europe? What were the main arguments of biblical literalism? Then go to evolution and see how evolution started to take hold in European scholarship. Go to moral relativity, look at how evolutionary ideas impacted our idea or concept of human behavior. How should people behave? And then end with cosmological relativity. How did the human understanding of the universe, scholarly understanding of the universe, change in the 20th century? So the big picture here is, right, that modern evolutionary thought replaced scriptural understanding of the world at the beginning of the 20th century, and then that replacement continued on because it was incredibly successful in terms of the ability of human beings to heal themselves, the ability of human beings to feed themselves, to put people on the moon, right? All of these accomplishments rested on a scientific understanding of reality.